Good morning. Beis, Volume 2, or top of page 1187. Aleph Kuf Pei Ayin. Under the starting the new paragraph. So what we learned yesterday was this. That all of existence is created with a purpose, and it's Adam, the man on earth, on the Shama Beguf, through the work of Mitzvahs, that creates the unity and the scholulus, the interconnectivity, through the bittel which Adam has, Adam Gematria Ma, Shem Ma, that connects the highest levels to the lowest levels, and also draws down the etzem, the very core essence, and not just a reflection. So the creation itself comes through a reflection of the divine. Ha'ara, even Atzilus, as we explained earlier. But to draw the core essence is specifically through that work, and that's both in general terms, that you draw down the Ratzon Elyon, which is Keser, the Ratzon Elyon, God's desire, that even though intuitively you would think that in the material world you cannot contain the highest levels of the divine, yet God gave his mitzvahs, his Ratzon, which is his desire, to man on earth to implement and to actualize. That's in general terms. And in specific, each mitzvah draws down this energy, this Ratzon, according to specific details. It's like Makif and Pnimi, Ratzon Elyon, and then each mitzvah draws it down, and he gave the examples, specific examples of drawing from higher than Zah, from Moichin, from Chachma, from Bina into Zah, from Zah into Malchus, all the way to Biyah, to the lowest worlds. And as he explained, it's really drawing from places that are higher than Atzilus. V'shamru derech havaya, that you shall keep, protect, or fulfill the path of God, create the path of God. What's derech havaya? Lasis doka mishpat. He says two ways you can explain it, and they're both correct. They're both. One is a derech, a path from higher than Atzilus into havaya within Atzilus, and one a path from havaya into Malchus, as he says, from Shem Havaya into Biyah, of Atzilus into Biyah, all the way down into existence, all the way to the lowest levels of existence, and that's why Derech is the Gematria twice Havaya Lekim. 224. Which is Havaya Lekim, as we spoke, Yichud Mamata L'mayl, Mayl Mata B'Shamayim Memal, Havaya Lekim, B'Shamayim Memal, the heaven above and the earth below, and the Posuk V'Yadait Ayin V'Shavesa Levecha Ki Hashem Elokim B'Shamayim Memal, the heaven above and earth below, which was the original question. What do you need both statements? And here's become clear, because it's about achieving unity of the lower and the higher. V'Zeu Bora Adam Al Kula, and that's the meaning of Rabbi Yehuda's words in Zohar Vayigash, that he created man above all, like the Pasuk says, which is to draw down from Atzmus Ein Sof and connecting Atzilus and Biyah, and drawing down from Atzmus Ein Sof that's higher than Atzilus. Anochi Asisi Eretz v'Adam Aloi Barasi. Barasi is the Gematria Taryag, the 613 mitzvahs, which is what the human being uses to draw all this down. But not to negate what he said earlier. Remember, in each level in the Shtalshlus, there's an Adam, which is the premise of that level. So essentially, without explicitly stating it, it is the Adam Lamat, well, he does say it, the Adam Atachten, the Adam below, which evolved from the Adam above. We're created in the divine image. But what we achieve below generates and essentially triggers the Adam within each level, the Shema and Bitl in each level, to reveal the premise of each level, which ultimately unites them all, like he said clearly, that premise unites, Chitzenius, is you see the distinctions at the bottom, closer to the bottom of page 1185. Okay, want to just point out one thing. I did look up the Zohar. We were all wrong. The meaning of the word when he brought the Zohar on. Let's just look up. Where's the Zohar right here? Shchinta. Kutchabricha v'shchinta. He brought Zohar medicine chayesara. V'shchanti b'sev k'shadam anich film. Kedei nasa reticha la'kadosh baruch hu. Reticha there means merkava. A merkava, a chariot. I remember it was something like a channel. A reticha la'kadosh baruch hu says clearly is a merkava. In other words, you're creating a channel, a chariot, a keli, like v'shchanti b'seicham. That's what reticha there in this Zohar means. It's explicit. If you look it up, you'll see it. He even uses later merkava. That's how it's typed there. So that's what reticha here is. We said welding, but that's not the meaning here. Maybe it's connected. When you weld, you connect, but maybe not. I don't know. Okay. So that's reticha. So I got that clear. And that's what he says. That's what tefillin does. It creates a keli, like you said, reticha l'karbav zah. So that's the pirush that a Kodesh Baruch Hu is Zah, Kodesh Baruch Hu is Zah. Maniach Tefillin is the Hamshach of Meichin Atzmim, a higher level of Meichin. I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to state it very clearly again. If you remember in the beginning of the Maimer, and the end of last discourse, and the beginning of this Maimer, he said clearly, besides that, the general is Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Those are the two levels of Havaya, Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai and Shiluv Adnai Ba'Havaya. In reverse order. One is Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai is Das Tachten. That means that the Yesh, the Ayin, discovering the divine within existence, or discovering how all the powers, the divine energy is all subsumed and absorbed and bottled, completely nullified, excuse me, in the presence of the Yesh Amiti. So it's two levels of perception, of understanding the divine, as we discussed at length at the end of last Maimer. But then he said that in Das Elyon there's an Amitis Das Elyon, Amitis Hayidiyah. So he said it clearly, but derech kvar hen gimel madregas. One is Das Tachten Malchus, so that yes. Then in the Earth say the Shtalshlus, that's through the Berurim of Biyah. Beis b'chinas Eshel Amayla Mishtalshlus. And then there is Gimel Atzmus Ein Sof Ayin Amiti. So there's actually in Das Elyon, he explains also two levels. So this fits very well with what we're saying here. Because at the end of the day, what the human being achieves is bringing Atzmus Ein Sof, the highest level, into Havaya, in Atzilus, and Havaya and Atzilus into Elikim, into Malchus, into Biyah. So you have all three levels in this picture here. Though he doesn't say three, but it's clear that it's consistent with what he said at the beginning of the Maimer. Okay. Now we continue. Unless someone has a question, I continue from the beginning of the paragraph. Ach mehechon on page 1187. Any questions?
Yeah, that choice of word by the Zohar Reticha. Does that indicate the strength of the bond? Is that why that choice of word, instead of saying Merkava or bond or Kesher or something like that? That made perhaps.
It looks like Reticha is just an Aramaic word for Merkava.
Nothing unusual. Nothing.
Well, I didn't go into depth looking into all the commentaries. Why, but that's something you can look. I mean, it's Shechanti B'Seicham. It's consistent with Shechanti. Reticha there means like a keli or a chariot. Merkava. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Ach, so if you want to follow the text and you don't have the sefer, look at ayinbeis.com. We have all these pages in PDF. Ach, mehechen yiskazah adam. From where does this person, does the person merit lahamshich b'chinas gili eire in sof ayidei mitzvahs, to draw down this revelation of the infinite divine through mitzvahs? From where does he get this power, this strength? From where does he merit the strength? The word is yiska zeh adam. It's an interesting expression. Mehechen yiska zeh adam. Doesn't say a koyach adam. It just says where does this person merit the ability to draw down what we just explained at length, that what adam accomplishes, something that nothing else can accomplish except the adam. So where does he get this? Shari be'emes hu hashafel mikol habruim. Because in truth is the human is the lowliest of all creations. What he means lowliest, you'll see the weakest, in many ways. We're not talking about the neshama, obviously. Hainu sheyored lamata yesem mekulam. This human being is the lowest, which means that he descended lower than all the creations. Ukamaimer, the Mishnah I mentioned a few classes back, Yitush Kodmacha. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin Lamed Zayin, Daf Lamed Zayin, where he asks why the human being was created last. So the first answer he gives is because he's the special guest. And first you set the table, then you bring the guest. But then he says that you should know that even an insect preceded you. Yitush is an insect, a lowly insect. Which of course the answer is when a human being behaves in the wrong way, he's lower than even an insect. He came after. So the human being, in this sense, is like the last of all creations, the lowest of all creations. Again, obviously, he's talking here purely the physical power of the Adam. Clearly, the Adam is the purpose of creation, but he's asking it in context of you seeing an Adam, a simple mortal, weak human being that has the power to achieve such accomplishments. So he's just amplifying the question. Acha inyanhu. The answer is this. The mishahu b'madrega tachtena yochalalis yeser. The one that's on the lowest level. I just want to add one thing. He doesn't say it explicitly, but also the Adam, all other creations never waver and they never betray God's will. A human being is able to behave in ways that are not just against God's will, but in a completely antithetical way. And in that sense, he's worse than a behemoth. Because a behemoth never changes course. Le mishana tafkidom, the language of Tanya, never changes, never wavers, and never wavers from his purpose. A human being can. He doesn't say it here, but you could just add that into the equation. So he says, but the truth is, the answer is that someone who's on a lower level can rise much, can rise to a greater level. As is known, the klal, the rule, the axiom, or the principle, maybe. Kidua klal, it's known the principle. The kol ha'geveya yeser yered lamata mata yeser. The higher and higher something is, the lower it comes down. Kol ha'geveya, anything that's high, that's even higher, comes down to the lowest. So the highest comes down to the lowest levels. The mashiyared lamata yeser, when we say that it descends lower because it came from a higher place, the classic example for this is, I don't know if he brings it here, a simple example Chassidus brings, that when you see a wall of stones, and then you see stones fall off the wall, the stones that are on the highest part of the wall will fall the farthest. So if you see a stone farthest from the wall, you know it came from the highest part of the wall. It's a simple Gashmistic example. So he's saying like this: the mashiyared lamata yeser, sharshe gevei yeser. The fact that it descends much lower than other levels is because its root is in a much higher level. The mishum zehu yachalered lamata yeser, and due to that, he's capable of going lower. So now he's adding, it's not just a physical thing that something higher falls lower. The reason, since he has a higher power, because he comes from a higher place, he's capable of going to a much lower place. In other words, the higher you come from, the farther you can go. You see, again, many examples for this. For example, one other example Chassidus brings when you pull back a bow and arrow. So the more you draw back, the farther the arrow will fly. So basically, because it's rooted in a higher place, that's why it has the capacity to go to a lower place. Whereas if it didn't have such a power, it wouldn't be able to go that low. And again, an example for that is the Malachim. When the angels complained at the end of Bereshis to God, look at the human being, look what they're behaving, God said, really? Let's see how you would be. And you have the Malachim, the Nephilim, that came down to earth, and they were the most corrupt of all. Because in Neshama, because it comes from a lower level in spirituality, in the spiritual worlds, it doesn't have the power to come into a world like ours And
Chazai ve'azoel. That's her name.
yeah, it doesn't have the power to come down to this world to do what it has to accomplish. It's a neshama that has greater power that can go to a darker place, which is also the explanation we give when people are faced with greater challenges. The greater the challenge, the more you say the neshama has more power. That's why it's put into that place. Because if you didn't have the power, you wouldn't be put in a situation that you could not deal with. The be'im lav, if this level that ended up in a lower place was not rooted and have the power from a higher place, it would not have been able to be mitzamtzim, to diminish itself. It wouldn't have been able to reach and go down to lower levels. So, for example, when you see a brilliant teacher, and one can only teach students that are on his level or commensurate to his level, and another teacher can bring the idea to even to children or to beginners. So ostensibly you'd think, oh, the first one is the more brilliant one, because you see, he expounds on brilliance to brilliant students. The second one speaks to children, but the answer is no. Is the person that understands the idea better and deeper is the one that can bring it to students that are far more infinitely apart from him. And this is in general the rule. The better you understand it, the lower, when I say lower, you can bring it to people who may not have any background at all. Someone that can only speak to people who speak their own language means they have an understanding, but they don't have the depth necessary. So that's what he says here. So because if it was not rooted there, he would not have been able to diminish himself to that extent. So the greater the individual, the more he can come downward. And for this reason, Moshe did not want malach. When we say in the pasuk, it says Moshe did not want that he didn't want a malach, that Hashem should send an angel to escort the Jews. Because a malach would not be able to contain, would not be able to tolerate any shortcomings, any transgressions. Because the malach does not come from such a high level. So Moshe asked Hashem, do not send a malach. Because a malach doesn't have the power to come down to a level that's on such a lower level. Rak Hashem yizbarach ba'atzmei. Only God himself, yochel etzamtzim, can diminish or conceal, if you wish, ulahash b'latzmei, and lower himself. Kav yochel, so to speak, gam lamato, ukemoi va'avarti beretz Mitzrayim. Like we say in the Haggadah on Pesach, from the Pasuk. I, avarti, ani v'loi malach, ani v'loi soraf. I, myself, passed over Mitzrayim. Because when you're dealing with going into a lower place, you need a higher power, and only the Eibishter can go, Kav Yochel, can lower himself to that extent because of his magnitude of who he is. Okay, so all this is coming to explain that that going lower gives the capacity to go up higher, and not only the capacity to go higher, it comes from a higher place. So now he goes back to neshamas. And so it is with the souls. The fact that they descended so low, to the point that you can make a statement that an insect precedes him. That's how low the human went down, below. Zeu mipnei, that's due to the fact, not that they're lower, that sharsham, their root, mipnei sharsham agavoyed Yisrael olu b'machshava b'bchinas machshava agdume da'ak. That's due to the fact, to the great and high root of neshamas Yisrael, which olu b'machshava, we say Yisrael arose in God's thought before everything else. And what thought is that? The machshava agdume da'ak. In the primordial, in the primal, and the earliest thought in Ak. So Yisrael Ola b'machshava. Now, of course, everything came from God's thought. What we're talking, Olam Machshava, that being that is prime in the highest levels. He doesn't say it here, but we learned, remember, Seif Maisa b'Machshava Tchila spoke about this as well. So, okay, so Machshava, V'hainu, which means what? It's the Sharsham b'Pchinas Ak, Hanetzel Harishin. That their root is Odam Kadmon, which is the first emanation. Remember, after the Tzimtzum, the Kav is the paintbrush, is the channel of energy that creates everything. What's the first Netzel Harishin? Ak. As a matter of fact, he used that expression at the bottom of page 1184 from the Ma'eda Eir when he said, Odam Kadmon is Netzel Harishin, Shehitzela Ein Sof. And then he said, Odam Harishin is Abilah. So Ak is when we use the expression that even when a leaf turns over, it's all rooted in Machshava Gduma Da'ak. But here, obviously, he's talking not about a leaf, he's talking about a neshama that's in the highest levels of Ak, which is the Netzal Rishon, meaning before Atzilus, before Havaya Atzilus. Remember, Adam Bara Al Kula. The human being is above everything. So even though the human comes lower, it's because it comes from a higher place. So he's explaining all this. And where's that higher place is Adam Kadmon. Now, of course, you could ask, don't we hear about neshamas that Olah b'machshava even before the tzimtzum? Right now, he's talking after the tzimtzum. It's not a contradiction. This is what he's discussing here because he wants to have a level that's higher. Remember, to unite Atzilus and Biyah, you need a level that's higher than both of them. So he explained that Adam is Pnimius. Now he's explaining that Adam is rooted in a place that's higher than Elah and Tata, of Alma Elah and Alma Tata. That's what he's explaining here. So what does he say from the higher and lower worlds? Shosh b'chinsak hanetzal adishon. U'kamesha kosav, like the Pasuk says in Tehillim. Ocher v'kodem sartoni. I was shaped. You, God shaped me. Ocher v'kodem, a back and a front. So of course, what does that mean? A human being has a back and a front. We know that. But David HaMelech means something more than that. What is Ocher v'kodem? So he explains. Ocher l'maisa bereshis, v'kodem l'maisa bereshis. You shape me. Ocher meaning coming after maisa bereshis. Ocher in the word not back, but last. Ocher means last, and kodem means first. So you created me after everything else was created. The last creation. Like even an insect preceded the human being. But also the kodam, the ma'aser bereshis, b'chinas ak. Kodam is from the word kadmen, from the earliest level, which is ak, odam kadmen. So you created me the last and the first, basically, the latest and the earliest. So this pasuk captures both sides, because it comes from the highest level. That's why it can go from, because it comes from kodam, from odam kadmen. That's why it can go to ocher, to the end, to the last. So that which goes lowest comes from the highest place.
The lashon pasuk is kedem, ocher v'kedem.
Okay. Like Aneid Mikedem. Yeah. Kedem, in other words, the earliest, yeah. And now he's going to say that it's rooted, the Neshamas Yisrael are rooted even higher. Ube'emes, and in truth, Mushrashim, Neshamas Yisrael, are rooted b'bchinas Atzmus Ein Sof. They're rooted in Atzmus Ein Sof, which is even higher than Adam Kadmon. U'kameisha Kosav Bonim Atem, says Bonim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem. You are sons, children to God. Alter Rebbe explains that a ben is rooted in Etzem Moyach Ha'av, in Perek Beis. So he's not just coming from a high level, he's coming from the essence itself. V'hainu, sheb'shosham hein l'maylam b'chinas harotzen de mitzvahs. In their root, Yisrael are even higher than the root, than the desire, the rotzen for mitzvahs. Remember, mitzvahs was the way they implement and bring the rotzen ha'elyon, keser, into existence. Now he's saying the neshamas are rooted even higher than that rotzen for mitzvahs. Valkein, and therefore, and due to this fact, bi'echelis ha-neshamas That's why they have the capacity, they have the ability, the power to draw down from the supernal Ratzon, from the Ratzon Elyon, which was such a high level as we discussed earlier, Keser, through mitzvahs. Because that answers that question. If a human being is lower than mitzvahs, how do they have the power to draw down something so high? The answer is that we're not lower, we're higher. We're rooted higher even than the desire for mitzvahs. The neshama then is sent down below in Acher, in the lowest levels, but it has the power that's coming from these highest. That's why it can draw all these levels downward from the highest all the way to the lowest. Dafka Adam. In other words, if you gave this mission to something that doesn't have that root, they would not be able to achieve. A malach would not be able to achieve this. A malachim cannot accomplish this mission. They can draw ruchnius and ruchniisdika worlds. Malachim, the serafim in Bria, the chayes hakodesh in Yetzirah, the efanim in Asiyah. But to achieve this, dafka the Adam, which is rooted in these highest levels. V'zeh inyan birchas ha-mitzvahs, and this is the inyan, this is the meaning, the significance of the blessing we make on mitzvahs. Baruch atah Hashem, we say Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, Hashem. She'anu tzrichim lahedes laHashem yizbarach. We begin because we need to acknowledge God, who's of course the giver of mitzvahs. So Baruch atah Hashem on a simple pshat means Baruch, blessed are you. It's a hidah. You're acknowledging God for the mitzvah He gave us. It says V'gam Baruch atah. The word Baruch also comes from the word Hamshacha, not just blessing Hamshacha. Avaya Shem Hamshichim Gili Shem Avaya. So not only are we acknowledging Shem Avaya, we're also Mamshichim Gili Shem Avaya. Remember He said with Derech Hashem, Derech Avaya, we draw into Havaya, we draw down Havaya, He says. We draw down the Gili, the revelation of the name Havaya. V'hu asher al yedei, v'hu al yedei, the continuing a blessing, is giving the whole meaning of a blessing. So it starts Baruch atah Hashem, acknowledging God and drawing down Havaya, the Gili of Havaya. V'hu al yedei, and that's through Asher Kiddishanu. The next statement is Asher Kiddishanu Mitzvahs v'tzivanu. So he says Asher Kiddishanu. Asher, what's the word Asher? Comes from the word Asher or Asher. B'chinas Makarat Tanugim. So we know Asher with an aleph in Hebrew is the root of pleasure. Asher with an ayin is wealth, but Asher with the aleph, Asher. Hu yitin madane melech. The Rebbe brings it very often, the pasuk from the bracha to Asher, the Shevet Asher, was Hu Yitin. He will deliver the Madane Melech, the delights of the king. Madanim from the words delights, sweet. Why? Because he brings delight, Madanim. The Rebbe always brings it because it's the Nasi of Bnei Asher is Yud Aleph Nisan, 11th of Nisan. So he always brings this level of Tainug, that Asher is connected to Tainug. And here he says the Mokirat Tainugim. So Tainugim. So every word, Baruch atah Hashem, Asher, even though Asher in Hebrew means the one who did, he's the one that sanctified us. But Asher also includes the meaning of Asher with an aleph, with Asher. The Mokirat Tainugim, B'chinas Shashuyim Atzmim. We're not just drawing down, but we're drawing down Shashuyim Atzmim, the core delights. You may recall Shashuyim v'Eyesh Shashuyim lefonov, the pasuk in Yeshayahu v'Eyesh Etzle Omen v'Eyesh Shashuyim lefonov. Shashuyim Atzmim in Chassidus, based on Kabbalah, which are based on Emek HaMelech, Shashua HaMelech Ba'atzmusei, which is the highest levels. In general, it's referring to Tainug, like Atik. Shashuyim Atzmim sometimes refers to even the highest levels, even before the Tzimtzum. Shashuyim Atzmim is the God's inner delights. The example, Shashuyim Melech Ba'atzmusei, means when there's no one else there, what does God delight? What does the king delight in? Shashuyim Atzmim, that is the highest levels. Shesham sheirish shemoken neshamis Yisrael. There is the root and source for the souls of Israel. So here we are. Baruch atah Hashem. We acknowledge God. We draw down the Gili Shem Havaya. Asher. He says, Al Yedei. Hu Yedei. Asher Kiddushanu. This is, how do we do this? How do we have the power to draw down the Shem Havaya? Because we come from the level of Asher, which is the Mokra Tainugim, the Shashrim Ha'atzmim. Then the next word, Asher Kiddushanu. What's Kiddushanu? Hivdilanu. B'madrega gevei yeser. You separated us in a level that's apart from and beyond everything else. So in other words, the word Asher is the level of Shashrim Atzmim, and that separated us. Kedushanu from the word Kadosh and Muvdal. Kedusha comes from being separate. Separate means apart and higher. So Kedushanu in that sense is, so he says, the Hamshim, Hivdalan Madrei Gevei Yeser, and then continues the next end of the Asher Kedushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. He doesn't explain the word v'tzivanu, I see.
Commanded. I
didn't ask that question. I said he doesn't explain the word v'tzivanu in the bracha. He says Asher Kedushanu v'dlan madrei gevei, and then he says the end of the bracha is al mitzvahs tzitzis. Oy lahaniach tefillin. It's going back to the examples he used on the last page. So what's the end of the bracha? It says Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. He doesn't explain melech haolam either. Baruch atah Hashem explains Asher Kedushanu, and then what do you say at the end? Al mitzvahs tzitzis. Or maybe everyone commute. Okay. So he says like this: Al mitzvahs tzitzis, oila niach tefillin. Different bracha, different film, different mitzvahs. Either on the mitzvah of tzitzis or to dawn put on tefillin. Lahamshich hamshachas ha'er v'agili adei mitzvahs tzitzis with tefillin. To do what? To draw this gili, this light and revelation through the particular mitzvah, whether it's mitzvah tzitzis or tefillin. So you have all the levels. The brichas hamitzvahs reflect everything we spoke about here. Now, what does the Adam do? The Adam is the one that does the mitzvah. He is rooted in the highest levels, we said now, in Atzmos Ein Sof, Shashrim Atzmim. So he says, Baruch atah Hashem. I acknowledge you, God. I draw down the Gili Shem Havaya. Let me just read that again. Baruch atah Hashem. Mamshichim Gili Shem Havaya. Through what? Through Asher. Through the fact that I am rooted, the neshamas are rooted, all the way in Shashrim Atzmim. Asher from the word Tainug, Mokra Tainugim, the source of pleasures. Kiddushanu, that you have separated me and I'm on this higher level. We are on this higher level. And then it draws it down in the specifics through tzitzis or tefillin or whatever the mitzvah may be. So you have the Ratzon Elyon, you have even higher than the Ratzon. Maybe that's Al-Tzivanu is the Ratzon. So Kedushan Asher is Tainug. So you're drawing from all the way the highest levels of Atik and Primis HaKeser, all the way higher than Ratzon, drawing it down all the way through the mitzvahs, all the way down below in the physical world. So that's what the bracha indicates. Exactly what he said, that the neshamas, which are rooted in these highest levels, are drawing it all down to the lowest levels. Okay. The Ima Yes. Even though.
For a moment, can we ask a question now?
Just a minute. Let me just finish. Let me just finish the piece. The Ima Yes. So even though Sha'anu Bruim Shvelim Lamata, even though we're lowly creatures below, on Yechelim Lahamshich, we're capable of drawing down Al Yidei, Asi Yesenu, but Maisa Mitzvahs, through our actions, in doing the Maisa Mitzvahs, the action of Mitzvahs. I'm sorry. The Hamshach Hadeis Sishen and Maisa Mitzvahs, through our actions, we're able to draw down Maisa Mitzvahs, the action of Mitzvahs. Sha'idezeh onu misreimamim l'sharshenu hakodum shalamayla min harotz in the Mitzvahs. So through this, misreimamim, again the word reimamus, we're able to be lifted and exalted and elevated to our root, our primordial root, hakodum, our earliest root, that's higher than the ratzon of mitzvahs. And I'll read one more line. And that's why we're capable to draw down bechinas hamechin, the level of meichin that we learned earlier. Meichin asmi bechinas primius ein sof. Remember, meichin and atzilus on its own is not primius ein sof. It's ha'od, it's reflection, it's God's meichin. But the meichin originate in the levels of the divine that are higher than meichin. So we're able to draw that into meichin from levels that are higher than meichin. B'chinas primius ein sof. Lias hagili ad lamata mato. To the point that we can break the gili all the way low, all the way the mata mata to the lowest levels. Okay, so he answered his question. The question, how is a person yiska? Me'echen yiska, where does a person have this ability? Or how does he merit? The answer is because we're rooted in the highest levels, even higher than the ratzon of mitzvahs, so we're able to draw it all down into the lowest levels, from levels that are even higher than the structure of ishtalshalos, even the structure of atzilus itself. So we're able to draw from the highest levels of Ein Sof, which would b'pashtus mean from the highest levels of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, of Das Elyon, but all the way downward into the lowest levels. So we have the whole picture now. He's not finished the discussion, but I'll pause here. If somebody wants to ask anything.
Before you said that actually Almighty is in Yeshaya, this is in Mishlei.
I said Yeshaya was a different pasuk I brought. When I mentioned Yeshaya,
all of this is in Mishlei.
or I brought Yeshaya was because I wanted to bring the. Well, I remember a different pasuk. Okay, if I misspoke, I misspoke. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I got the flow properly understood. Asher Kichon Mitzvahs. Asher is the source of Shama Sefel, and Kichanu is that we are.
Asher is the level of Madanim, he says. Mokar HaTanugim. Shashrim Atzmin, from where the souls are rooted.
Yes. Asher, that we come from that source. Kichanu, he gives, that's the ability through Mitzvahs to be Mamshich, a higher order.
Kiddushanu means that we're separate from and we're higher and apart from everything. That's what makes Asher Kiddushanu goes together.
Yes.
Asher, because you're coming from such a high level, so Kiddushanu, Hivdilanu, we are separate from a higher level. That's why, then he goes, and that's why we have the capacity to draw down the Ratzon all the way down below through tzitzis, through tefillin, and so on.
Rabbi.
Hold on, did you finish? 1 second.
I think so. Asher is mamish what we are. Kichanu is the, so to speak, the ability, and Mitzvahs is the action.
No. Kiddushanu is not the ability. Kiddushanu, Asher and Kiddushanu are the capacity, where we come from.
Okay.
That we have this level that's coming from these highest levels. That gives us the capacity. In other words, Baruch Atah Hashem, we have the power to bring down the Gilui of Hashem Havaya. Melech HaElam B'Pashas would mean we bring it down all the way into the world. Asher Kiddushanu, you, from the Shashrim Atzmim, gave us the power to be Kiddushanu beyond it all, and therefore we can draw it all down.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Rabbi. Oh, sorry. Rabbi?
Yeah.
So with the fact that Rabbi Rashab leaves out Vitzivanu, could it be that So we go through that whole explanation of Baruch Atah Hashem and Asher Kedushan, where we're mushrash, or a higher level, we're separated. Could it be then the Mitzvahs is like mitzvahs in general, Vitzivanu, a specific action of he's directly commanding us? Like there's this idea of a mitzvah, then that mitzvah he's commanding us, and it's manifest in a particular mitzvah, which is, for example, tefillin or tzitzis. So it's kind of going from a klal to a prat in terms of mitzvahs.
You could say that. You could say that. Well, the prat is when you say the actual mitzvah, tefillin, tzitzis, or tefillin. You could say that. Why he left that out, it could be because it's self-understood. And when you say, once you say, he says the key things. He also left out Baruch Melech HaElam. So Baruch Atah Hashem, he explained. Melech HaElam would be the king of the universe. So basically, we're drawing down Havaya into Melech HaElam. Asher. And how do we have the power? Because we come from this root, all the way in the deepest pleasures of the divine. And Kedishanu, which have separated us from everything, from all of existence. So even though we were created last, but we're really Kadam, or we said Mikedem, that we are rooted in the highest level. And then it could be self-understood. The Mitzvos of Tzivanu would be that you sanctified us. In this case, you've separated us with the mitzvahs. So now we're able to draw down the mitzvahs. Vitzivanu could be from the word kesher, connect. You can speculate different ways, but I don't think the detail comes into play until the end of the bracha. When you say al mitzvahs tzitzis or al aniach tefillin, that's when, like he said before, the ratzon in general, mitzvahs of Vitzivanu is the ratzon in general, is the way I would understand it. So in other words, asher and kedishanu is tainug. Then comes the ratzon of mitzvahs, which is lower than tainug. Like he said, the neshamas are higher than the ratzon. And then comes the specific, each mitzvah in its own particular way, like we learned in the previous page. That's how I would probably explain it.
It's interesting that Melech and Vitzivanu are both not explained because it's the Melech that commands. It's interesting that like they're both kind of left out.
I don't know. I wouldn't read into it so much because I don't know if it's connected to that. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's hard to say. My understanding is because he's explaining the words that are most important to explain that we wouldn't figure out on our own. And the rest, you can already fill in the blanks, so to speak.
Yeah, got it.
That's my understanding of why he does it. But generally, what he's saying is, remember, the whole thing began. So the blessing on the mitzvahs actually captures the whole theme that he's discussing here, where we have this power from and what we accomplish. So the blessing on a mitzvah is not just a nice blessing that says that, blessed are you, God, that you gave me a mitzvah. It's actually explaining and is describing the whole process of bringing from the highest levels that the Adam does to the lowest, which is what he's saying, lemata mata. Okay?
That would be the exact same as al divrei Sarah also.
Yeah, whatever the mitzvah may be. Yeah. Another discussion is why blessings like birchas hanenin, like birchas ha'eichlin, when we bless food, we don't make asher kedushan mitzvahs v'tzivanu. We just go from melech ha'elam to the ametzlech min aretz or shahakol ni b'dvarei. It's more shorter version. But the same idea can be said, except there, remember, not being there, it's a different, it's a bracha not on a mitzvah, it's a bracha on hana. It's more related to das tachten, to the lowest, to the world, to recognize the divine within existence. It's actually the ayin of the yesh hanivra. That could be why it maybe don't say all those words, possibly.
It perhaps also, maybe this is like an oversimplification of it, but like when you think of the things we're saying, Asher Kedishanu, they're kind of more, like Jewish things, like lighting Shabbos candles, wrapping tefillin as opposed to eating, which everybody does, even goyim eat, so it's like, I don't know, maybe.
Or even more basically, like I just said, one is about what we thank God for what we benefit from. The other is a thanking God and acknowledging, bringing in a new hamshacha into the world that's beyond existence, which is the mitzvahs. Okay. So this explains also b'yechaltenu what he said earlier on the previous page, that through tefillin we draw from the moichin atzmim, from levels that are beyond into Kadosh Baruch Hu Maniach, into Zah, as he explained previously. Okay.
Because on food, it would be more like the whole like you said, das tatum. That would be that area.
It looks like it would be more like the Ayin of the Yesha and Nivra, right? Where here we're talking about drawing down the Ratzon of God that's beyond. Yeah. Listen, the mitzvahs you're going to have different levels. There are mitzvahs that are more das tachten oriented. There are mitzvahs that are more das elyon oriented as well. But that's another discussion. I don't want to go there right now. Let's continue.
Okay.
V'hagam. Now it goes v'hagam. Okay, so we've established and answered the question how the so-called lowly human being really is rooted in the highest levels. That's why it can go so low and bring down all those divine revelations all the way from the highest levels. But now comes this. And though all this is true, but as we are below, a lot of the language here is quite interesting. You don't see it so common. When he said the words, for example, he used the word Misreimim anu through mitzvahs not a very common expression of Chassidus. He's like talking about us, that we are able to go back to our source. I wonder whether this is taken from another mimer. It's just a unique expression. You don't see it that often. But now he says like this, similar tone. V'hagam de'biyesenu lamata, and though while we're below, as we are here below in this world, einon margishim esa'ed, we don't feel this air. What we just said now, that we're mamshech, we draw down all this energy. So though we don't feel it, makol mokim, nevertheless, hari al yedei mitzvos, nimshecha er lamata. Nevertheless, that doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change the fact that through the mitzvahs we draw down the energy down below. This pasuk is brought, if you all know, this pasuk is made famous in Basa Legani.
It's in Tehillim. V'ani bar v'lo eido, behema yisraisi imoch.
Right. Where is it? Where's the pasuk?
In Tehillim.
Yeah. I know that. No, I'm saying it's made famous. I said in Basa Legani, he brings this. So what it means like this, it's talking about that we are ba'er v'lo eida, we are like naked. Huh?
Wow. Amoretz, empty.
Yeah, devoid. It's like being empty. Like v'lo eida, and don't and are not aware. Behemoth yisi imcha. Imach. Referring to that, compared to you, we are like, I am like behemoth, like an animal. Meaning
Also,
that we lack awareness.
Tanya brings it down. In Tanya, in Perek Memvav, at the end, it brings it also. This pasuk.
Right. Which Perek?
Memvav.
He says,
Oh.
He says it right here. Like he said, that's why I asked which Perek. Perek Memvav. I think he brings it more than once, no?
Yeah, possible. Yeah, I remember that.
I think in the earlier Prakim as well. So bottom line, the fact that we don't feel it doesn't mean it's not happening. Like he says the pasuk, that we are empty, we are ignorant, and don't know. And like animals, meaning that we're not aware of the things that are happening. And nevertheless, the Rebbe Rashab does not suffice with that. So that answers the question, where if we're doing all these amshachas, why come we don't feel it? So he says, however, v'ktsas ha'adam meir b'gili, and a bit, a glimpse of a reflection does radiate in a revealed way. Where do we see it? Masha mitzvah geredes mitzvah. When we see a mitzvah drags another mitzvah, mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, So why is it leading to another mitzvah? When a person does a mitzvah, you see naturally it causes them to want to do another mitzvah. That's ktsas gili, because the mitzvahs did something to you. It was mamshach some gili. So it was mamshach a gili. We see it. In one place we see it is when one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. So that's some glimpse. So even though for us it's in the form of a mitzvah leading to another mitzvah, in truth, through a mitzvah, we're memshech mechusa eir. The very personality, the very core personality of eir. In other words, it's not just a reflection, it's not just another mitzvah in the sense that we don't really see major revelation. The truth is, mechusa eir is nimshech. The mitzvah gashmis, so he's explaining. In other words, what the Rebbe Rashab is doing here is qualifying for people like ourselves that say, we don't see all this. Say all these hamshachas, Adam is changing the world from the highest levels, the lowest levels. So he says, we don't see it because we're not on that level to see or feel. And yet, mitzvah geras mitzvah, now he's going to explain that the truth is a mitzvah accomplishes a tremendous hamshacha. This is going to say now, explain. That mitzvah gashmis, a physical mitzvah that you do. The examples he was using here was tzitzis, tefillin, and then atilas yadayim, but referring to any physical mitzvah. Nasa keli lebchinas ratzon elyon. The physical mitzvah makes him into a keli, makes existence into a container, a receptacle for the ratzon elyon, for God's will. Remember what I said yesterday. If we did not have mitzvahs, chas v'shalom, and we just lived in this world, we would have, obviously the world is created by God, but we would not manifest God's will. We would be living in a world that God desired to create. But how do we draw the will? It's like I mentioned yesterday about the home, the structure, the art. A melech can be a king over an entire empire, but that doesn't mean that you're fulfilling his will. It just means he's your king. He's your leader. But if he sends you a command and says, I want you to do something, I'm asking you, or I'm commanding you, I'm asking you to do a mitzvah. That is your relationship now with the melech is a whole different one. It's not just you're a subject of his and you're living in his empire. You actually now have a relationship. The Rebbe brings this quite often. He speaks about the blessing of mitzvahs, that the Eibishter said, I'm not just creating you. I want a relationship with you. I'm going to give you something I'm asking you to do. What greater thing can a human being do in this world than be connected and fulfill, have the schus, the merit, to fulfill the ratzon of the Creator himself? So, in that sense, ratzon elyon is a very high level, but how do we become a keli to it? That's ma'aseh mitzvahs. When you do the mitzvah, you're creating a keli for the ratzon elyon. Now you could say, 1 second, animals, daimim tzameach chai, mineral, plant, animals, also fulfill God's will. Whatever they do, their very behavior is because God wants it to be that way. The sun, the moon, the celestial bodies, tzva hashamayim, tzva haaretz, everything is fulfilling God's will. But we don't call it a mitzvah. You don't say that when a chicken feeds its chicks, or when an animal, any animal, is breeding and taking care of its young, that's mekayim mitzvah. Why not? Because there's no bchira, there's no choice, and all it is really is like fulfilling the program God created. It's like a puppet. It doesn't even have a choice. This is the way it is. So yes, it's implementing God's plan, but to say that this is a keli for ratzon elyon, you can't say that, because ratzon elyon is also the previous dika plan. Why does God want this world? All of nature is part of the art. It's part of the structure, but the purpose of why God wants it, the ratzon elyon, I want this world because it's fulfilling my nesava kadosh baruch hu did b'tachtenim. That's only done by a bal bchira, by a person who has choice and who's fulfilling a mitzvah that he could have not fulfilled, And he's making a keli of this world through the physical mitzvah for the Ratzon Elyon to dwell here. So, when there was gold, silver, and copper, kasav, zav, and necheshes, zav, kasav, zav, and necheshes, they're all part of God's creation. But when there was the mitzvah of asel lemigdash v'shachanti b'seicham, preceded by the mitzvah v'yikchu li truma, that you shall take a contribution of gold, silver, and copper, and all the other physical items, now a mitzvah is being fulfilled that makes v'shachanti b'seicham, I will dwell among you. And what, God did not dwell in the gold, silver, copper before the Mishkan was built? He created it, but you can't call it a Mishkan. Like you said before, like we learned before, you want a Mishkan, you want a Markova, you want that, you need a mitzvah, you need someone to do something that now makes God welcome and comfortable in this existence. Now, the beginning of creation, before Chet Eitz Adas, we said, Ika Shechina b'tachteinim haisa, the Shechina was here. It was revealed because no one had banished it. It was not concealed. But the rest of life, especially after Chet Eitz Adas, is to draw down in a way that makes this world conducive to godliness. You could also have gold, silver, and copper that's used either for neutral purposes or even for negative purposes. You can build Zav Labal, you can build a golden calf, as we learn in the Parsha. So the kavanah here is that there should be a keli to Ratzon Elyon. Just wanted to put it in context, what a mitzvah does as opposed before a mitzvah. So before the mitzvah, the object is there, but you haven't done anything with it. When you take cloth, parchment, you make it into tefillin. You take wool, you make it into tzitzis. And then you put on the tefillin, you put on the tzitzis, and you make the bracha. Then you draw down and you make the existence, the wool, or the parchment, or the animal hide, or any other physical object, you turn it into a keli for Elokus, for Ratzon Elyon to be specifically. V'gam lebchinas ha'er pnimi. Now he's specifically stating what I said before. The Ratzon Elyon is the general principle of God's desire and mitzvahs. But you also make it a keli for the immanent energy that enters and permeates existence. Now he specifies clearly the two things was makif and primi. Remember the questions he asked on page 1184 from Rabbi Yehuda? The question was, how can you reveal, Rabbi Yitzchak said that the lower world is like the higher world, but then he asked the question, from makif point of view, that's everything is equal, but how do you reveal that? He said even more so, how could you say there'll be revelation of Eir B'Keli when the Biyah is lower than Atzilus? And now he's explained that a mitzvah, this is the 2 points that he made. This was why it was so vital. The general Ratzon is the makif that we're revealing when we do a mitzvah, revealing. And the specific mitzvah, tefillin, tzitzis, tefillin, and the Netilas Yadayim, is the specific hamshacha pratis that the specific mitzvah accomplishes. Hanim shalad mitzvah kanal. Okay. And now he's going to go back to the beginning of the Maimer, where what is he coming to negate when he says b'shamayim amal va'aretz mitachas? He's coming to negate those that say that you can't bring the ruchnis in full intensity into the gashmistic world. He's going to go back to lama yem ragim ayena lekechem. So he's now going to tie it all together. It comes to the conclusion of this Maimer to what was said in the beginning. What did they come to accomplish? That we're talking about unifying the highest and the lowest, and that's what we do through the mitzvahs that he just described and explained. Okay, so I'm going to stop here before we zehu lama yemru. We'll continue that tomorrow. Anybody want to ask anything?
Yes, please. On page 1184, it's very interesting when he's describing the descent of Ma. It says that Malchus, as it's in Tzilus, is called Adam, and when it's Yored Rabia, it's called Behema. And here we seem to be talking about the transformation of this level of Behema into Adam, Yisad Maaseh Mitzvahs. Here we finally, I didn't understand why we said that. It's about 2/3 of the way down. Line ending with bechinas, bechi, comma. of Chasash. It says Kamar Adam, it goes down to Bia, it's called Behema. I wondered why he brought that out, but here seems to be the transformation, that Hamshach of the Panemius in the changes from Behema to Adam Labanta.
Yeah, you could say that, but I think it's the context in simple terms. Here he's only using behemoth to explain why we don't feel the hamshacha. That's really technically why he brings it here. I don't know if he's talking about the transformation here of behemoth into Adam, but the truth is, earlier he did say that. When we bring ma into ban, so ban is gematria behemoth, yes, he does say that. The Malchus, as it descends below Nikra b'shem behema, but Atzilus b'chinas Adam, because it's more concealed, correct? Yeah, but ultimately there is the pshat, that through birurim, remember we learned that through the birurim, we spoke about that earlier in the previous mimer, the bottom of page 1179. We said the birurim of lechem in haaretz. If you remember, he also brought Michael Behema, Se'irim, Sfira Se'imer, which comes after Pesach, between Pesach and Shavuos, is still Michael Adam and Michael Behema before you get to lechem in hashamayim. So the concept of refining the animal within us, the nefesh habamis, is ultimately the goal, that you want to bring the whole elikus into the animal soul as well. Said that clearly back there. Just looking, I don't know if he used Behema, Michael Behema, but he did use it. If you look back on the page 1145, 1040, Aleph Mem Hey, I think. Yeah. No, not Aleph Mem Hey. Sorry, no. In the beginning of when he spoke about, let me see a moment. I think the mimer of Atem Nitzavim, maybe. There's a whole section where he spoke about Michael Behema. Why Shabbos is 1 second. Yeah, I think it's the mimer of Sove, maybe. Okay, let's see. The whole piece that first week when we went out of Mitzrayim, we first ate Michael lechem in haaretz, and then we prepared to get the lechem in hashamayim. Where was that?
Right. Das Tachton de Das Elyon. Yes, I remember the topic.
Yeah. So there he did bring Behema. I'm trying to look for where it is. It's somewhere here. Yeah, bottom of page 1180. Referring to page 1134. Yeah, good.
Shabbos. Yeah. Achol Matzah, lechem in haaretz.
Yeah, and then on 1138, he speaks about it more at length. So there's no question that we're ultimately elevating the animal soul, even, as we said, even the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is ultimately being connected to the higher levels of Ayin. That's the ultimate goal here. So in that sense, it makes sense in that way. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Good. So we'll stop here at the bottom of page, or close to the bottom of page 1180.